Writing a personal statement is something that everyone who applies to university in the UK has to do. It's stressful to write because it often seems like if it's not absolutely perfect, we won't get a place at university. But hopefully after the advice in this video, you'll realise that that's not true, and hopefully you'll feel more comfortable with the whole process. To make sure that I cover everything, I've divided the video into sections with timestamps in the description, which are a quick overview of the details, how to plan and prepare, what to include, how to write it, and then I'll wrap up with my final thoughts. I applied to study law at university, and obviously I'm not saying that my personal statement was perfect, but I do think that I learned a lot along the way, and I was pretty happy with the final version. But before we get started, I have to remind you to please back up everything that you're working on. There's nothing worse than spending all of this time working on a document and then watching it just disappear in a second. So if you take one thing from this video, please back up everything that you work on. Also, if you have any questions, then I'll do my best to answer them, especially if they're about applying for law. And if you found this video valuable, then please leave a like below and consider subscribing for more. Right, so you can find all this information on the UCAS website, but for those who aren't sure or want a little refresher, this section is a general overview about what's expected of you in your personal statement. To start with, it's important to remember that your personal statement is not a barrier to entry for getting an offer to go to university. Although it's definitely important, universities will take your application holistically, and some actually put less weighting on it compared to other indicators like your predicted grades. So don't let it overtake your life. You should definitely still be focusing on your A-levels. Remember that you only write one personal statement, so don't mention any specific universities in it. If you're applying to Cambridge or Oxford, then the deadline is the 15th of October. And for all other universities, the deadline is the 15th of January. One tip that I have is actually to aim for the October deadline, even if you're not applying to Oxbridge. Doing this will help you write faster and will let you focus on other things later on, like your revision. Your personal statement should also not be more than 4,000 characters long, including spaces. It also can't be more than 47 lines long, which includes blank lines. So the space you have to write is actually quite limited. I think that you should aim for at least 3,500 characters. As far as I can see it, there's no reason why you shouldn't try and get to the 4,000 character limit, so long as you don't waffle or lie to get there. UCAS say that they have software that detects plagiarism, and whether that's true or not doesn't matter. You should still definitely not copy someone else's personal statement. Not only do you risk your application being removed, but it's your application, so you want your personality and experiences to show. Although it's good to show a bit of personality, you should not be making any jokes because they can easily be misinterpreted. And you should also try and keep to plain English. Don't use all these fancy words. They don't mean anything, and often they'll just use up more characters. A well-written, truthful, and interesting personal statement is ideal. You need to prove to the universities that you deserve an offer. So that was just a quick overview about the information that you should keep in your mind when you write your personal statement. But now, let's move on to the fun part. Planning is definitely something that you should do before you start to write your personal statement. You want to be able to include as much relevant information about yourself as possible. And if you don't plan, then it's likely that you'll forget a few points. I will talk about what you should actually include in the next section, so skip there if that's what you want to know. Remember that you should obviously be using a Word document to plan rather than using pen and paper, because then you'll be able to make as many changes as you want. But before you start planning, you should really know the course that you want to do at university. This will determine what activities, books, lectures, and extracurricular activities that you talk about. So once you have a firm idea of the degree that you want to do, you should start to make a list of all the relevant points that you could talk about. At the start, you want to write as many points as you can. We can prioritize them later. You should talk to your teachers, your friends, and your family to make sure that you haven't missed out any points that you might have forgotten about. The longer the list, the more options you'll have when you start to write it properly. As part of your preparation, you may want to go to as many events and lectures and do as many courses and read as many books as you can that are related to your subject, so that you can talk about as many things as possible in your personal statement. Again, the more points you mention, the better. But at the same time, there's very little value in mentioning things you've done multiple years ago. Another tip that I found useful was to look online for resources about how to write personal statements specifically for the degree that I wanted to do. It's a good way to jog your memory about things that you may have done in the past but you've forgotten. And it's also a very good way of knowing what universities want to see in your personal statement. Even better is to ask your teachers and students in the year above for their personal statements, because the odds are that their quality will be higher than the random ones that you'll find online. But at the same time, you want to show the admissions tutors a part of you. So don't be too heavily influenced by what other people have written in theirs. But by far the best thing that you can do is to start planning and preparing as early as you can. This gives you time to make as many small changes as you need to and to draft as many times as you need to. Writing a personal statement can be stressful, but if you give yourself enough time to write it, that will definitely reduce the pressure. You're going to have to write it eventually, so don't leave it until the week before the deadline to start writing. And at the same time, you should expect to do many drafts, so don't expect for it to be perfect in a week. At the start, you should prepare as many points as you can. You may not end up including all of them, but you can flesh out the best ones later on. What to include in your personal statement is often a question that many students have because they're not sure what universities want to see. Hopefully, you've already been doing things to contribute to your future self. That way, you have enough points to make yourself look good. If not, that's not a problem. There's still plenty of time to read more books, get more experience, and take part in more online courses. One thing that I should mention is that although you want to make yourself look as good as you can, everything that you mention must be true, and you should be able to talk about it if you're asked. You don't want to be caught out if you have an interview, and sometimes admissions tutors can see if what you're writing is a lie. Essentially, you want to show as much as possible why you're interested in that subject and why you deserve an offer. From the list of points you made in the planning stage, you should choose the best ones and the ones that are most relevant to the degree that you want to study. This way, you can demonstrate the skills, qualities, and enthusiasm that they're looking for. Work experience is always a great thing to talk about because it can be directly linked to the subject you want to study or not. For example, I've done some work experience at a satellite company in London called Inmarsat and at Wall of Astoria in Dubai. Obviously, neither of them are directly related to law, but I spoke about the skills and experience that I got from them. For example, afterwards, I had better communication and interpersonal skills. You just have to write about how your experiences have benefited you as a person. If you've had a job recently, then you can definitely talk about the skills and qualities that you learned from that. But obviously, if you've done some work experience directly related to the subject you want to study, then definitely mention that. For example, I shadowed a barrister at a Crown Court, and I spoke about what I learned about law as a subject from it and why it convinced me that I wanted to study it at university. All the real-world experience that you've had has contributed to you as a person. So make sure that you use all the experiences that you've had to make your personal statement really stand out. I also spent some time talking about some specific points about my A-level subjects and how they relate to the degree that I want to do. For me, it was things like gaining analytical skills from economics and specific information about Stalin and his controversial use of the show trials in history. However, obviously the best things to include are those that relate directly to the subject that you want to study at university. You should be trying to get some extra subject knowledge anyways by reading books, and you should definitely mention the ones you found particularly interesting. If you've been to any lectures, then mention them and what you've learned. The same goes for online courses like those from FutureLearn and OpenLearn, as well as podcasts and news articles that impacted your degree understanding in some way. For example, I mentioned books like The Law Machine and Letters to a Law Student, some of the important legal cases that I'd read about, current news stories that I found interesting, and the law focus of my EPQ. Again, I should mention that you have to be truthful with everything that you talk about. I actually ended up being interviewed by the author of Letters to a Law Student, so don't be caught out. Basically, the two rules are that everything that you mention should be relevant in some way to your degree to prove that you want to study it and should be truthful. Finally, you should also mention things to show how well-rounded you are as a person. How much you talk about depends on where you want to study and what you want to study. Oxbridge applicants should focus at least 70% of their personal statement on their academic achievements because that's what they want to see. But if you're doing an art subject or something like physical education, then you should obviously include more extra activities that you've done and less about your academics. Either way, it's good to show that you're an interesting person. For example, I spoke about being a French tutor, doing the Duke of Edinburgh, volunteering, doing a public speaking competition, my roles at school, and doing Young Enterprise. I feel like most people should focus their personal statement on academic things related to their degree, but it's still important to show the scope of things that you've done and how they've impacted you. Don't just mention individual points. You have to talk about the experience that you gain from them and the skills that you gain from them. Once you have all your points and you've planned out some of your ideas, it's time to actually start writing your personal statement. As I mentioned, you should expect to have many drafts, which is why it's important to start writing as early as you can. I ended up having 18 drafts, which was excessive, but each one of them improved. You can start by writing as much as you want to, but keep in mind that there's a 4,000 character limit. So you need to be economical with your words because you're trying to have as much impact as possible with as few words as possible, whilst at the same time still being interesting. It can be challenging to start with, but I'm sure sure that you'll be happy with it at the end as you start to improve it over time. So start as early as you can. Now, obviously there's lots of ways to structure your personal statement, and I'm not going to pretend like I have a secret formula, but after reading advice online from UCAS and talking to some admissions tutors, I would say there's a few things you should include to write a strong personal statement. One tip that I have is to write your introduction last. Often, actually starting your personal statement is the most difficult thing, but if you write most of it first, then you'll find it easier to go back to the start once you've finished. While we're talking about the introduction, you should aim to make it as interesting as possible to encourage admissions tutors to read your entire personal statement. They have thousands to read, so you should try and make yours stick in their mind as much as you can. And the best way to do this is by having an interesting opening sentence. Some advice that I've read online says that you should structure your personal statement in order of information that is most relevant. And I think that's a pretty reasonable way to structure it. For example, I started by talking about academic things directly linked to my degree, my law work experience, the law books that I'd read, and the cases that I had found interesting. All of these things show how interested I am to study law at university. I then moved on to talk about my A-level course and how the subjects that I'm currently studying have given me skills to be a successful law student at university. The transferable skills that you learnt from sixth form may be something that you want to mention if they're relevant. Finally, I spoke about my wider experience in extracurricular activities, like work experience, jobs, Duke of Edinburgh, and Young Enterprise. I ended with the things that are important, relevant, and interesting, but not necessarily academic or directly linked to my law degree. My conclusion wasn't long at all, but it reinforced why I think that I would be a good law student at university. Again, you're just trying to prove to the admissions tutors that you deserve an offer. So everything that you write in your personal statement should be trying to achieve that goal. I should also mention that the grammar and the words that you use are important. Make sure that you don't have things like spelling mistakes because it looks lazy. You should be able to remove them quite easily. You also shouldn't be too flamboyant with your words, but at the same time you shouldn't be too basic. It's useful for some emotion and excitement for your future degree to be shown in how you write. Really, the biggest piece of advice I have is just to continuously improve your personal statement over time. That's why I keep saying to start thinking about relevant points as early as you can. Perfecting your personal statement really is not something that you can do in just a week. You have to put the time in. So I hope this video was helpful in giving you advice for writing your personal statement. It is a difficult thing to do, but remember, it is not the only thing on your application. For example, they'll see your past grades, your predicted grades, and your teachers will write you a reference which can include even more specific points about you. Teachers are a great source of advice for writing your personal statement because they've been doing this for years. You should ask them for help, but not too often because it gets annoying. You should also try not to ask too many teachers or you'll feel overwhelmed with all the feedback that you're getting. At the end of the day, your personal statement is yours. It represents you as a person. So obviously you should ask for advice, but don't follow it blindly. So give yourself plenty of time to plan and to draft it as many times as you need to. There's no point in waiting until the deadline is only a few weeks away. Personally, I started planning mine over summer and it was ready by the end of September, ready for the October deadline. So if you found this video valuable, then please leave a like and consider subscribing for more content. And of course, feel free to comment any questions or feedback that you may have below. Good luck and thanks for watching.